just do it? Or more like, just do it properly. And they are so set on infinite growth on a world with finite resources. Their CEO has an estimated worth of a casual $54.5 billion. Actually, only 10% of their sustainability collection is made with recycled materials. Oh, and they're currently being sued for that. Hello and welcome to the Green Stocking Society. My name is Shara, I'm a philosophy grad and I work in sustainable fashion. In this installment of my brand review series, we're diving into all of the sustainability and ethical issues surrounding the giant sportswear brand Nike. First things first, let me take you on a whistle-stop tour of Nike's history. I think it's really important with giant brands like Nike that we go back to their very first early days to look at what kind of core values the companies were founded on, because if they weren't founded on these values of sustainability and ethics, then it's much harder for them down the line when they become these global corporations to retrofit that onto the brand later on. Nike, or back then Blue Ribbon Sports, was founded by Phil Knight in 1962. He was a Stanford graduate who wanted to bring quality Japanese running shoes to the US. In 1971, it took on the iconic swoosh and the name Nike, and by 1989 they had become the largest sportswear provider in the US. In the 1990s, things started to get a little bit choppy. United Students Against Sweatshops launched an intense campaign against Nike following a report that was published about the working conditions in their Indonesian factories. In 1996, Life magazine published this photo of a 12-year-old boy in Pakistan stitching this swoosh onto a football, and Nike's reputation really started to suffer. Yep, child labour will do that. In 1998, Phil Knight himself announced that the Nike product has become synonymous with slave wages, forced overtime, and arbitrary abuse. Ouch. So around 2004, the brand made some really big strategic changes. They published their full list of suppliers, they started doing more audits on their factories, and they also started to incorporate recycled materials into their ranges. In 2015, a Morgan Stanley report was calling them the most sustainable apparel and footwear company in North America, which might mean something if, you know, the bar wasn't literally on the floor. But it's not all been roses for Nike recently. The Clean Clothes campaign released their foul play report in 2018, talking about the massive amounts paid to Nike's athletes compared to the wages of their garment workers, followed by the hashtag Pay Your Workers campaign after Nike failed to pay over $1.3 million that was owed to 1,284 Cambodian garment workers who lost their jobs due to COVID-19 in 2020. You can actually send an email directly to Nike's CEO telling him to hashtag pay up. I'll leave a link in the description and in the comments. Check that out and go do it. Whilst they've had several lawsuits filed against them recently, they are pushing ahead with their sustainability goals, which they are calling their Move to Zero campaign, which they launched in 2019. So this includes achieving 0.5 million tons less greenhouse gas emissions, 100% of waste diverted from landfill, and a 25% reduction in freshwater usage per kilogram by 2025. Their particular brand of sustainability has definitely been created through this lens of sport. They talk about the fact that climate change is affecting their athletes and how they train, and the fact that they want to make the world better for athletes specifically and protect the future of sport. All the while, they're just actually increasing their emissions. In 2022, it was revealed that their emissions increased by 163% between 2015 and 2021, but they were actually able to report this as a decrease due to a loophole in the way that the Carbon Disclosure Project calculates emissions. Basically, they grew their revenue a little bit more than they grew their emissions, so I guess that's a win. And that brings us on to the present in 2023, when a lawsuit is currently being filed against them in federal court for falsely and misleadingly marketing products as environmentally friendly. This case also alleges that what they're calling environmentally friendly products are actually in violation of the Missouri Merchandising Practices Act, since of the 2,452 products that they have in their sustainability collection, only about 10% are actually made with recycled materials. That gives you a pretty good idea of what's been going down, so for the remainder of the video I'm going to focus in on two areas. So first of all, materials and reuse and circularity, and then we're going to talk about transparency and worker rights in their supply chain. Nike is known for creating products that are worn by some of the best athletes in the world, so clearly design and materials are incredibly important to them. Recently, they've expressed a commitment to sustainable innovation, and a big part of that for them has been moving more towards circular design.
Our shoes and clothing being a part of the natural cycle of grow, use, decay. Molecules borrowed for a while and then reclaimed for what's next.
For Nike, focusing on circular design has meant that they've been looking better at their production process, looking at what's going to waste and how they can utilize that, as well as looking at introducing more recycled materials into their supply chain. As part of this, they've developed a whole bunch of new materials and cool new products, and they all have like very cool kind of futuristic names. For example, Flyknit, which is a type of upper for these shoes made from 6 to 7 plastic bottles each, creating 60% less waste than a traditional upper. And then you have Fly Leather, which is at least 50% recycled leather mixed with synthetic fibers. That last bit, mixing things with synthetic fibers, is important, so I'll come back to that in a minute. They also use recycled nylon, which creates 50% less carbon emissions than virgin nylon, recycled polyester, which they say is diverting an average of 1 billion plastic bottles from landfill and waterways a year, cotton from the Better Cotton Initiative, as well as organic cotton, and they are also recycling more than 1.5 million pounds of cotton a year as well. Their most standout sustainable collection is Space Hippie, created to meet the challenge of making the most sustainable, lowest carbon footprint shoe ever, and inspired by the idea that in space you have to use what you've got and make the most of the materials that you can find wherever you are.
We are on a journey to make the most sustainable shoe ever.
They created something called Crater Foam, which is this recycled plastic and rubber mix, which is then on top of that there is something called Zoom X, which is again this like recycled foam, which is really high performance. And then they added an upper, which is 25% post-consumer t-shirts that have been recycled, 25% recycled textile waste, and 50% recycled plastic bottles. And then there's no heat or dye added in the process. Space Hippie is basically then just this collection of shoes that have been made from rubbish, but they've been made to look like really cool. We then also have Nike Forward, which is clothing made from 75% less carbon compared to a traditional knit fleece. I think it has to be said, and it is an important thing to acknowledge when we're talking about Nike, is that they have like an incredible marketing budget. They have one of the most clearly recognizable brand identities of the world. All of their marketing, all of their campaigns, everything is so perfectly curated. And in the case of Space Hippie and Nike Forward, the message that they seem to be wanting to share is like, look at all this cool innovative stuff that we're doing with waste, and we're making reusing waste cool, which in essence, like, I think that's great. But firstly, and I think I say this in basically every video that I ever do, but recycled polyester is still polyester. Polyester is essentially plastic. It's made from fossil fuels. Of course, if you use recycled polyester, then you're cutting that bit out and the amount of energy that you're using is a lot less. However, polyester still sheds microfibers in the wash, which end up in our waterways, and they are consumed by fish, and then they are consumed by us. Recycled polyester is actually usually made from taking plastic bottles and turning them into this recycled polyester yarn, but it would actually just be a lot better if we took those plastic bottles and recycled them again into more plastic bottles and kept them in that particular loop rather than taking them out. Because once you make recycled polyester yarn out of plastic bottles, you can't then use it for anything else, and recycling recycled polyester garments is really difficult. So whilst Nike claims that they are protecting our waterways by taking this plastic out of the environment and putting it into their products, that is just actually untrue, and it's actually worse for our oceans than if those plastic bottles had just been recycled into more plastic bottles and kept in use in that way. They also don't state what percentage of their clothes are made from biodegradable materials like cotton and organic cotton compared to how much of their clothing uses polyester. And it's not just about what materials you're using, but also how much. So the scale of production from companies like Nike and the scale of consumption that we are encouraged to partake in is just never going to be sustainable, no matter what it's made from. So the second biggest problem is that of scale. So Space Hippie is 4 shoes out of thousands. This trend that we're seeing of brands creating their own like eco labels like H&M Conscious or Primark Cares is actually not helping, because these projects are tiny compared to the whole operations of the brand. We have to consider them in the larger business as usual context. Greenpeace state that besides closing the loop, brands should also work to slow the flow, meaning producing fewer products of better quality and extending their use through reuse, repair, rental, and upcycling. And if fashion brands honestly want to address their environmental and social impacts, they need to work towards creating slow, circular fashion that respects environmental boundaries and the rights and well-being of people. We need a complete redesign of fashion, not just little tweaks and like innovations. Nike do have product care guides on their site, which is great to encourage customers to look after their products so that they last longer. They also have a recreation project and a donation project, but it's not clear how much of those things actually just end up being shipped off to countries in the global south, which is something that a lot of fast fashion brands do, and that's where a lot of like charity donations end up as well. You can also buy like refurbished Nike shoes that are like new or that have been gently worn, but overall it doesn't appear to me like they've built out a complete structure of circularity across the entire business. They've kind of just injected a little bit in here or there so that they could use it as like a marketing tactic. They would need to make a commitment to only make things that they could then recover and remake into other things as part of a completely closed loop circular economy. Brief interlude here to say that if you are enjoying this video, please don't forget to hit the like and the subscribe button. Whilst I've been talking, I've been scrolling down my entire Google Doc of notes, and I'm still not at the bottom because it's about 4,000 words, and I looked at almost like something like 50 sources for this video so that I could bring you all of this information so you don't have to do the research yourself. But if you are enjoying it, please let me know by hitting that like and the subscribe. It really helps me out. Back to the video. Just do it. Just do it. Just do it. Whilst the business of fashion has said that Nike has transformed itself from having a soiled reputation to becoming a sustainability leader, which might be true on like a really small scale based on what we've been saying, they're definitely not a leader when it comes to ethics. As I mentioned, Nike has become a lot more transparent in the last few decades. They received a 53 in the latest Fashion Transparency Index, with the average across the 250 brands being reviewed being 24. And they were also praised in the news recently for reinstating some local union leaders at one of the garment factories in Cambodia after they were fired. They are members of the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, but then again, like, so is Boohoo. And they are also Fair Labor Association Workplace Code of Conduct verified, but they did also co-found the Fair Labor Association, so I'm not sure how much stock to put in that. When it comes to treatment of women and diversity, Nike has invested $97 million into funding under-resourced communities. They have programs supporting carers and WNBA retiring athletes to get back into their careers and to develop their careers, as well as expanding access to play for young girls. That said, in 2018, 4 women employees sued Nike over alleged gender discrimination and sexual harassment, and Nike athletes have also claimed that they were not paid during their pregnancies, and they offered a 70% pay cut to one of their most coveted athletes, Alison Felix, for post-birth sponsorship contracts. Then they proceeded to release a bunch of ads supporting women doing sport whilst pregnant. Classic. And of course we have to consider that most of their garment workers are also women and they are not being paid fairly. The Clean Clothes campaign estimates that it would only take about 10 cents more per garment to be able to provide these garment workers with a living wage. And they say that this is just a drop in the ocean for Nike, who earned $21 billion in the financial year from 2021 to 2022. A wider issue that has affected a lot of fashion brands, not just Nike, was the arrival of the COVID-19 pandemic. So when the pandemic arrived, clothing companies experienced a drop in demand, which led to a number of big brands cancelling orders with their suppliers and refusing to pay for completed orders. This led to workers being dismissed in droves. In Bangladesh, nearly 3/4 of furloughed workers and 4 out of 5 dismissed workers were denied pay in March 2020. So Nike has been involved in wage theft as well. Nike has also failed to allow the Workers' Rights Consortium to independently monitor its factories. That means closing down a channel through which workers could raise concerns and be ensured an objective, independent investigation of their complaints. For all of these reasons, as well as the fact that Nike spends in excess of $1 million on political lobbying every year, the ethical consumer is not very thrilled with Nike, referring to allegations of forced labor in their supply chain, failure to provide a living wage, and gender discrimination in their assessment of the brand. So overall, Nike has taken some steps to become more transparent, but you do kind of have to wonder how much they're just doing this to improve their reputation, which has kind of been basically in the gutter, and they're trying to revive it. How much that is the motivating factor behind it rather than like actually caring about these people, you know? Either way, they still have a long way to go. Whilst they're happy to admit that they're having to retrofit sustainability onto their production, onto their supply chain and their brand,
I see a lot of startups these days who are indeed starting with sustainability just built in from the beginning. We have a different challenge, which is we are retrofitting an old model.
You can't really say that you're just retrofitting like general human decency into your supply chain, because what was it that you started with then? The ethical brand rating app Good On You has rated Nike their equivalent of 3 out of 5. It's a start. And I think that that tracks based on everything that we've been saying. They've taken some big steps in terms of transparency, and the stuff that they're doing with their innovative design process and making it cool to reuse waste definitely has some potential, but only if it's scaled up. So the question kind of becomes not how sustainable is Nike, but can Nike apply the same thinking that created Space Hippie and Nike Forward to the entirety of their supply chain, given that there are 600 factories to account for and thousands of products, and they also have to keep in mind the fact that they are producing these incredibly high quality products for the best athletes in the world. And even beyond that, is it even possible for massive global corporations like Nike to continue existing within a climate just world when they are so set on infinite growth on a world with finite resources? Take this quote from their then Chief Sustainability Officer back in 2015, for example. Post the Paris Agreement, we expect the business down the road will need to become a 2-degree business, and that equates to being able to grow whilst radically reducing our impact. And that's the problem. They think that there's nothing wrong with them continuing to want to grow and get
even bigger.
Nike is dangerous because even though it's quite different to these newer fast fashion brands like Cider or Boohoo, it still thrives off this idea of overconsumption and trends. In fact, it creates trends itself. They've simply had a lot longer to build up some really good marketing. You could so easily believe that a massive brand like Nike that has this big focus on innovation and like technology and like looking at like space exploration as inspiration and all of this stuff is going to come up with this some kind of magic bullet that is going to somehow transform how we make stuff so that we can continue buying the same amount of stuff that we currently buy and somehow at the same time maybe still save the planet. Unlike brands like Shein, for example, which more thrive off ignorance and a really low price point. But underneath all of that, it's still part of this same capitalist exploitative system of fast fashion. But they might not be able to keep it up for very much longer because a crackdown on greenwashing is definitely on the horizon. This Guardian article from the 15th of May details how companies using terms like carbon neutral or carbon positive and those concerned with offsetting will soon undergo greater scrutiny by organisations like the Advertising Standards Authority in the UK, and the EU is also working on its own legislation too. Bottom line, avoid Nike, tell their CEO to #PayUp, check out the link in the description, and maybe try out some of these other more sustainable, more ethical alternatives if you are looking for like great running shoes or activewear. And next time you see some really cool, like innovative, sustainable product, remember sometimes size does actually matter. And what I mean by that is scale. Sustainable solutions need to scale, not just be these gimmicky outliers. But what do you think about Nike? Let me know in the comments what you thought of this video and any other brands that you want me to review next. And if you enjoyed it, please don't forget to hit the like and the subscribe button. It really helps me out and shows me that you really enjoy this kind of content so that I can make more. Just do it. And until next time, stay kind, see you later, bye.